There comes a moment when your soul whispers that everything familiar is about to dissolve, and you find yourself standing at the edge of a transformation so profound that even your dreams seem to hold their breath. You feel it in your bones before your mind can name it. This restless stirring that signals the final phase before your life completely changes. A phenomenon that Carl Jung recognized as one of the most sacred and terrifying passages of human consciousness. This isn't the kind of change you plan or orchestrate. It's the kind that emerges from the deepest layers of your psyche, carrying with it both the promise of rebirth and the necessity of letting everything you thought you were fall away like old skin. Jung understood that these moments of radical transformation don't announce themselves with fanfare, but rather through a series of subtle yet unmistakable signs that something ancient within you is stirring to life. What you're about to discover will illuminate why this phase feels both like dying and being born simultaneously, and how recognizing these psychological patterns can help you navigate what Jung called the most crucial passage of individuation. The insights we'll explore together may fundamentally alter how you understand not just this moment in your life, but the very nature of psychological transformation itself. The first whisper of this approaching metamorphosis often arrives as an inexplicable anxiety that seems to have no clear source. You wake with a heaviness you can't explain, as though something invisible is pressing against your chest, demanding acknowledgement. Jung identified this peculiar unease as the numinous breaking through the boundaries of ordinary consciousness, a signal that the deeper layers of your psyche are preparing for a fundamental reorganization. You might find yourself scanning your environment obsessively, searching for threats that exist only in the realm of psychological transition. Your nervous system responds as though you're being hunted. Yet the predator is nothing more than your own unlived life demanding expression. The sensation of being watched by an invisible presence reflects the activation of what Jung called the transcendent function, the psyche's innate capacity to bridge conscious and unconscious contents. As this inner pressure builds, you begin to notice that your familiar world feels increasingly foreign. The roles you've played with such dedication start to feel like costumes that no longer fit. Your carefully constructed identity, what Jung termed the persona, begins to crack under the weight of your emerging authentic self. This isn't failure, it's the necessary dissolution that precedes psychological rebirth. The relationships that once provided comfort now feel strangely hollow. Conversations that used to engage you leave you feeling empty, as though you're speaking a language that no longer carries meaning. Jung understood this as the psyche's way of withdrawing energy from external attachments to fuel the internal process of transformation. Your soul is quite literally preparing to invest its life force in a completely different way of being. You may find yourself canceling plans without clear reasons, preferring solitude to social engagement. This isn't antisocial behavior, it's your deep wisdom recognizing that the noise of external demands would interfere with the delicate process of inner listening that's beginning to unfold. Jung observed that those approaching major psychological transformation often experience this magnetic pull toward solitude as preparation for encountering their own depths. The professional ambitions that once drove you start to lose their grip on your imagination. Projects that seemed urgent last month now feel curiously irrelevant. This isn't laziness or depression speaking, it's the voice of your authentic self beginning to question whether the goals you've been pursuing actually belong to you or were inherited from family expectations and cultural programming. Jung's concept of the complex reveals itself powerfully during this phase. The internal voices of parents, teachers, and authority figures that have guided your choices begin to lose their commanding presence. You start to hear these voices as exactly what they are, internalized representations rather than eternal truths. This recognition can be deeply unsettling, as it means taking full responsibility for your choices without the comfort of external validation. As these old patterns lose their power, you enter what feels like an emotional desert. The enthusiasm that once carried you through challenges seems to have evaporated. Creative projects feel forced. Social interactions require tremendous effort. This sterility isn't permanent. It's the necessary emptying that must occur before new life can take root in your psychological soil. During this barren period, you might experience what mystics call the dark night of the soul. Faith in everything you once believed begins to waver. The meaning systems that supported you through difficult times now feel like empty concepts. This isn't spiritual crisis, it's spiritual maturation, the natural result of outgrowing belief systems that were never truly your own. The depression that accompanies this phase carries a sacred quality that distinguishes it from clinical depression. While clinical depression often involves a sense of hopelessness and disconnection, this transformational melancholy contains within it a seed of profound renewal. Jung understood that certain types of psychological suffering serve an essential function in the individuation process, breaking down rigid structures that prevent authentic self-expression. You might find yourself sleeping more than usual, as though your body recognizes the need for the kind of deep rest that accompanies major internal reorganization. Dreams become more vivid and strange, filled with symbols and scenarios that your rational mind struggles to interpret. These aren't random neural firings. They're messages from the unconscious, attempting to communicate the nature of the transformation that's underway. Jung understood that psychological wholeness requires the integration of all aspects of the personality, including those we've learned to judge as unacceptable. The shadow, far from being simply negative, contains vital energy that's been sequestered away from conscious use. As this energy begins to return, it can feel overwhelming and frightening, but it's actually the fuel that will power your psychological rebirth. The rage that surfaces during this period often carries decades of accumulated resentment. You might find yourself angry at parents who have been dead for years, at teachers who crushed your creativity, at partners who never truly saw you. This anger isn't pathological. It's the healthy aggression that was suppressed in order to maintain relationships that required you to betray your authentic nature. As this shadow material continues to emerge, your body begins to speak in ways it never has before. Memories stored in your muscles start to surface without invitation. Physical sensations connected to experiences you thought you'd forgotten demand attention. This isn't hysteria. It's the body's wisdom finally being allowed to communicate what it has been holding for years. Jung recognized the body as a crucial partner in the individuation process. The soma holds truths that the mind, in its need to maintain psychological coherence, often overlooks or dismisses. As you approach major transformation, this body wisdom becomes increasingly insistent, using symptoms and sensations to guide your attention toward aspects of your experience that require integration. This is the phase where you might find yourself afraid of your own power, your own desires, your own capacity for both creation and destruction. Jung understood this fear as a natural response to encountering the full spectrum of human potentiality within yourself. The individuated person doesn't eliminate their capacity for shadow expression. They develop conscious relationship with it. As you move deeper into this transformational process, the old sources of meaning and identity continue to fall away. The career that once defined you feels increasingly irrelevant. The relationships that once anchored your sense of self start to feel like remnants from another lifetime. This isn't loss, it's liberation, though it rarely feels that way in the moment. The silence that begins to pervade your inner world isn't emptiness, it's spaciousness. After years of being driven by external voices and internal critics, you're finally creating room for your own authentic voice to emerge. This voice is often quiet at first, barely audible above the noise of old patterns, but it carries an authority that's unmistakably your own. Jung observed that those undergoing major psychological transformation often experience a profound shift in their relationship to time. The future that once seemed so important starts to fade in significance. The past that once held such power over your imagination begins to lose its grip. You find yourself increasingly present to the moment, not through spiritual practice, but through the simple recognition that this moment is where your authentic life actually exists. This shift reflects the emergence of what Jung called the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity to generate new possibilities that transcend the limitations of previous patterns. The creative impulses that arise during this period often feel as though they're coming from somewhere beyond your personal consciousness. And in a sense, they are. They represent the collaboration between your conscious intentions and the vast creative intelligence of the unconscious. The courage to say no without explanation or justification begins to develop naturally during this phase. This isn't rebellion or defiance. It's the establishment of authentic boundaries based on your emerging understanding of what truly serves your developmental needs. You start to recognize that many of the obligations you've carried were never really yours to bear. This boundary-setting capacity often shocks both you and the people around you. Family members who have depended on your automatic compliance suddenly encounter resistance. Professional colleagues who have taken your availability for granted find themselves having to negotiate with someone who no longer automatically accommodates their demands. This isn't selfishness, it's self-respect finally finding its voice. The relationships that survive this boundary-setting process undergo profound transformation. Those that were based primarily on your willingness to suppress your authentic needs either evolve to accommodate your emerging self or naturally fade from your life. This isn't cruelty, it's the organic result of living with greater integrity. As you continue to move through this transformational passage, you begin to experience moments of what Jung called enantiodromia, the psychological law whereby any extreme tends to turn into its opposite. The emptiness that felt so desolating begins to reveal itself as fertile potential. The loneliness that seemed so isolating starts to feel like sacred solitude. The confusion that clouded your vision gradually clears into unprecedented clarity. These moments of reversal don't happen through effort or technique. They emerge naturally as the psyche completes its process of reorganization. The energy that was locked up in maintaining outdated patterns becomes available for new forms of expression. The vitality that was suppressed to maintain false harmony returns with startling intensity. You might notice that your capacity for joy returns, but it has a different quality than before. Rather than depending on external circumstances or achievements, this joy arises from simple presence, from the recognition that you're finally allowing yourself to exist as you actually are, rather than as you think you should be. The wisdom that emerges from this process doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It manifests as a quiet knowing that doesn't require validation or explanation. You find yourself making decisions from a place of clarity that surprises you with its certainty. This isn't intellectual understanding, it's the fruit of having integrated previously unconscious aspects of your psyche into conscious awareness. Jung understood that the individuated person doesn't become perfect, they become whole. This wholeness includes the capacity for error, for shadow expression, for human limitation. But it also includes unprecedented access to creative potential, authentic relationship, and genuine freedom from the unconscious patterns that once governed your choices. As this transformation deepens, you begin to recognize that the person you used to be wasn't wrong or bad. They simply weren't complete. The roles you played, the relationships you maintained, the goals you pursued all served essential functions in bringing you to this moment of greater possibility. This recognition allows you to release the past without bitterness and embrace the future without anxiety. The grief that accompanies this recognition is profound and necessary. You're not just changing. You're mourning the death of an entire way of being. The comfort of familiar patterns, even dysfunctional ones, must be consciously released to make room for the unknown territory of authentic living. This mourning process can't be rushed or bypassed. It requires the same respect you would give to any significant loss. Jung observed that those who successfully navigate this transformational passage develop what he called a religious attitude toward life, not necessarily in the conventional sense, but in terms of recognizing the sacred nature of psychological development. You begin to trust that the process of becoming who you truly are is worthy of your complete attention and respect. The loneliness that once felt like punishment begins to reveal itself as the natural state of an individuated consciousness. This isn't the loneliness of disconnection, but the solitude of wholeness, the recognition that your most authentic self can only be accessed in the privacy of your own inner experience. Paradoxically, this acceptance of fundamental aloneness makes genuine connection with others more possible than ever before. The new consciousness that emerges from this process doesn't seek to fix or change others. It simply offers the gift of authentic presence. Your relationships become less complicated because you're no longer unconsciously projecting your unlived potential onto others or expecting them to complete what you haven't developed within yourself. This shift in relational dynamics often surprises those around you. Family members who were accustomed to your emotional reactivity encounter someone who responds rather than reacts. Professional colleagues who expected your automatic agreement find themselves dealing with someone who speaks from genuine consideration rather than people-pleasing reflexes. The compassion that develops during this process extends most surprisingly to yourself. The harsh inner critic that once drove you toward impossible standards gradually softens into a more benevolent inner presence. You begin to treat yourself with the same kindness you would offer a beloved friend navigating difficult circumstances. This self-compassion isn't soft or permissive. It's fiercely protective of your emerging authenticity. You become less willing to sacrifice your genuine needs for the comfort of others. Not because you care less about people, but because you recognize that your authentic presence is a greater gift than your accommodating performance. As this transformation continues to unfold, you notice that your relationship to suffering fundamentally changes. Rather than seeing pain as something to be avoided or quickly resolved, you begin to recognize it as information, as guidance, as the psyche's way of directing your attention toward aspects of your experience that require integration. This doesn't mean becoming masochistic or seeking out unnecessary difficulty. It means developing the capacity to be present with whatever arises in your experience without immediately moving to fix, change, or escape it. Jung understood this capacity as one of the hallmarks of psychological maturity. The ability to hold paradox and complexity without collapsing into simplistic solutions. The creative expressions that emerge during this phase often surprise you with their originality and power. Projects that seemed impossible when you were operating from your conditioned patterns suddenly feel not only feasible but inevitable. This creativity doesn't arise from effort or technique, but from the natural expression of psychological energy that's no longer being suppressed. You might find yourself writing, painting, singing, building, or creating in ways that feel both familiar and completely new. These expressions carry the quality of your authentic voice, and they often communicate truths that your rational mind couldn't have articulated. Jung recognized this creative emergence as one of the primary ways the individuated self expresses its unique contribution to the world. The guidance that begins to flow during this period doesn't come from external sources or spiritual authorities, but from the deep wisdom of your own integrated psyche. You find yourself knowing things you never learned, understanding situations with unprecedented clarity, making choices that align with purposes you couldn't have consciously formulated. This inner guidance doesn't eliminate uncertainty or guarantee success in conventional terms. Instead, it provides a reliable compass for navigating the complex terrain of authentic living. You begin to trust your instincts in ways that would have terrified your previous self, not because you've become reckless, but because you've developed relationship with the deeper intelligence that operates beneath the surface of conscious thought. The sense of being guided by something larger than your personal will becomes increasingly pronounced. This doesn't mean losing personal agency, but rather discovering how individual will can align with transpersonal purposes. Jung understood this alignment as the fruit of successful individuation, the capacity to serve both personal authenticity and collective evolution. As you near the completion of this transformational phase, you begin to recognize that you're not the same person who began this journey. The shifts in your awareness, relationships, creative expression, and life choices reflect a fundamental reorganization of your psychological structure. You haven't just changed your mind about things, you've become someone new. This recognition can be both exhilarating and sobering. The freedom to live authentically comes with the responsibility of conscious choice. You can no longer blame your circumstances, your history, or other people for the quality of your life experience. This accountability isn't burdensome, it's liberating, but it requires a level of maturity that your previous self couldn't have sustained. The integration of shadow material that occurred during this process means you now have access to psychological resources that were previously unavailable. The anger you learn to suppress becomes assertiveness in service of your authentic needs. The sexuality you learn to shame becomes creative life force. The power you learn to fear becomes capacity for beneficial influence. Jung understood that the individuated person doesn't become socially isolated, but rather engages with society from a place of genuine choice rather than unconscious compulsion. Your participation in collective activities becomes more conscious and therefore more effective. You contribute your unique gifts rather than trying to be what others need you to be. The wisdom that has emerged from this transformational process doesn't seek to convince or convert anyone. It simply exists as a quality of presence that others can sense even when they can't articulate what they're perceiving. Your very being becomes a form of teaching, demonstrating possibilities that others might not have imagined for themselves. This teaching through presence isn't intentional or effortful. It's simply the natural result of living with greater integration between your conscious intentions and unconscious wisdom. People often comment that you seem different, more settled, more genuinely yourself, though they might not be able to specify exactly what has changed. The confidence that characterizes this new phase of life doesn't depend on external validation or achievement. It arises from the simple recognition that you're finally living as who you actually are rather than who you thought you should be. This authenticity creates a kind of unshakable ground beneath your feet, even in the midst of external uncertainty. As you look back on the person you were before this transformation began, you feel tremendous compassion for their struggles and profound gratitude for their willingness to endure the discomfort that made this growth possible. You recognize that every painful experience, every moment of confusion, every relationship challenge served the essential purpose of bringing you to this place of greater wholeness. This isn't because you've become perfect or problem-free, but because you're operating from a place of greater honesty about who you are and what you have to offer. This honesty creates clarity that others find refreshing, even when it means you can no longer accommodate their projections or unconscious expectations. This trust in the unfolding process of your life doesn't eliminate challenges or guarantee smooth sailing. Instead, it provides you with the psychological resources to meet whatever arises with presence and creativity rather than reactivity and fear. You've learned to dance with uncertainty rather than being paralyzed by it. The peace that pervades this new way of being isn't the peace of having solved all problems, but the peace of having integrated enough of your unconscious material that you're no longer at war with yourself. External conflicts may still arise, but they no longer trigger the same kind of internal chaos that used to characterize your responses to difficulty. Jung understood this inner peace as one of the primary fruits of successful individuation. It's not a static state but a dynamic equilibrium, a way of being that can accommodate the full spectrum of human experience without losing its essential center. You've found your way home to yourself, and this homecoming transforms everything else. If you found yourself recognizing your own experience in this description, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters, and your courage to undergo this kind of transformation serves not only your own development, but the collective evolution of consciousness itself. Consider subscribing to continue this journey of discovery together as we explore more of Jung's profound insights into the mysterious process of becoming who we truly are.